At the restaurant I financed, my mom and dad told my girlfriend not to eat anything, so I declared I won't pay their bills anymore, declined all their charges, and burned all bridges. Yesterday, they were kneeling at my doorstep. Hey everyone, my name is Jake, and I'm 27 years old. About 10 months ago, I learned one of the most painful lessons of my life. Blood doesn't automatically make you family. What started as what should have been a joyful retirement celebration for my mother turned into a complete disaster that exposed the true nature of the people I'd been supporting for years. They disrespected me and the woman I love, all while expecting me to continue paying for their lifestyle. They were dead wrong about how that was going to work out. Here's exactly what went down and how their greed ultimately destroyed them. I've been grinding and working my ass off since I was 17 years old. It all started when I began working summers doing basic HVAC repairs for my neighbor, who owned a small contracting business. Those early years were incredibly formative for me. I spent 3 full years learning absolutely everything I could about the trade. Residential systems, commercial installations, and those brutal emergency calls at 2 in the morning when someone's air conditioning died during the suffocating Florida heat. During those learning years, I saved every single dollar I could while living in a tiny studio apartment that barely fit my bed and a mini refrigerator. The place was cramped and uncomfortable, but those early years taught me the real value of every dollar I earned. While my high school friends were blowing their money on concerts, parties, and other typical teenage expenses, I was dedicating my time to learning ductwork and refrigeration systems inside and out. I spent my weekends at supply houses, memorizing part numbers and building relationships with wholesalers. I knew that understanding the business side was just as important as the technical skills. Every connection I made and every part number I memorized was an investment in my future. Looking back, those relationships and that knowledge became the foundation of everything I built later. 6 years ago, I took out a business loan for $52,000 and started my own HVAC company. That first year was absolutely brutal in every possible way. I was living off instant noodles and bologna sandwiches, sleeping in my van between jobs to save money on gas. There were nights when I'd park at a 24-hour diner just to use their bathroom and maybe grab a cup of coffee if I could afford it. At one point, I had exactly $275 in my checking account when I landed my first major commercial contract. It was a hotel chain that needed all their locations serviced, and that single contract changed everything for me. The steady monthly income of $9,200 for maintenance and emergency calls across 15 different locations gave me the cash flow I desperately needed to hire my first employee and buy better equipment. Word spread quickly through the hospitality industry after that. Hotels talk to each other, and when you prove you can handle their HVAC disasters professionally and efficiently, suddenly you become the go-to guy for commercial emergencies. That reputation became everything. Now I've got 4 trucks running daily routes across the city, along with a 3,000 square foot shop that serves as our home base. I'm pulling in good money annually, and the business has grown beyond what I ever imagined when I started. My business partner Nick handles all the commercial side of operations, while I focus on residential work and emergency calls. We've got 3 apprentices who are learning the trade, and we're actually looking at buying the building we currently rent next year. The shop itself has become something I'm genuinely proud of. It's got a full fabrication area where we custom build ductwork for specialized jobs. Just last month, I dropped $18,000 on a new sheet metal brake that cuts our job time in half. It's one of those investments that pays for itself within months because of the efficiency gains. My personal truck is a loaded F350 Super Duty with all the contractor packages you could want. Toolboxes, ladder racks, auxiliary lighting, the works. It cost me $72,000, but it's essentially a mobile office that allows me to handle business from anywhere. The best part is I can write it off as a business expense, which makes the investment even smarter. My fiancée Sophie is 25 years old and teaches 3rd grade. She's the kind of teacher who actually gives a damn about her kids, which is becoming rarer these days. She spends her own money on classroom supplies because the school district's budget is pathetic, and she regularly stays late for parent conferences. Somehow, she manages to make learning fun for a bunch of 8-year-olds, which takes a special kind of patience and creativity. Sophie is everything my family isn't: patient, kind, and she never acts like the world owes her something. We've been together for 4 years and have been living together for the past 10 months in a decent 3-bedroom house that I bought in a neighborhood that's actually respectable. The house was a foreclosure that I got for $210,000, and I put another $45,000 into renovating it properly. I completely gutted the master bathroom and installed a walk-in shower with rainfall heads and body jets. I figured if I'm in the HVAC business, my own climate control better be impressive. Sophie picked out all the finishes for the renovation, and honestly, she's got much better taste than I do. The kitchen renovation alone cost more than my first work truck, but seeing her face when we finished the project was worth every penny I spent. Here's the thing about success that nobody warns you about. Once you start making real money, family suddenly becomes very interested in your financial situation. For the past 3 years, I've been covering my parents' monthly rent of $1,600 because my dad's pension and my mom's government salary barely covered their other expenses. They never asked directly, which should have been my first red flag, but there were always hints about how tight money was and how worried they were about making rent each month. Being the dutiful son, I set up an automatic transfer to help them out. Looking back now, I should have seen the manipulation for exactly what it was. My mom would call every month around the 27th with some story about unexpected expenses. Car repairs, medical bills, home maintenance issues. It was always just enough to make me feel guilty about having money while they struggled. My dad would get on the phone afterward, talking about how proud he was of my success and how he knew I'd take care of family. It was a classic guilt trip wrapped in praise, and I fell for it completely. My mom, Linda, spent 39 years working at the county tax office, and I swear she genuinely enjoyed making people miserable during those decades. She acts like those years of government employment make her some kind of public service hero, and she has strong opinions about everything from how I run my business to why she thinks Sophie isn't good enough for me. Her attitude toward people has always been condescending, but it got worse after she gained some authority at work. My dad, Robert, has been retired for 5 years from his job at the water department. These days, he spends most of his time watching cable news and complaining about everything from gas prices to the weather forecast. He's not a bad guy, just completely dominated by my mom and has been for their entire 34-year marriage. His pension is actually decent, around $3,400 monthly. But my mom's spending habits eat through it incredibly fast. She's always been terrible with money, buying things they don't need and then acting surprised when bills come due. My sister Ashley works in some corporate marketing job for an insurance company, constantly throwing around buzzwords like synergizing solutions and optimizing client engagement. She's married to a guy named Tyler who works in IT and actually has his head screwed on straight, which makes their marriage dynamic interesting to watch. Ashley lives paycheck to paycheck in a $2,400 a month apartment that she honestly can't afford. But she acts superior because she has a college degree and wears business suits to work. She's been jealous of my success ever since I started making more money than her without accumulating any student loan debt. She acts like she's on the Fortune 500 board when the reality is that she's one missed paycheck away from asking dad for gas money. She'll make snide comments about how some people get lucky in business or how blue-collar work isn't sustainable long-term. Meanwhile, she's got $82,000 in student loans for a marketing degree that barely pays more than what my apprentices make in their first year. Tyler has always been cool with me, though. He works as a network administrator for a mid-sized company, makes decent money, and doesn't pretend to be something he's not. He's actually one of the few people in the family who congratulated me when my business really took off instead of making snide comments about getting lucky or questioning whether my success would last. My cousin Carlos works in construction and has always been the most normal person in our entire family. He calls out people's BS and doesn't pretend everything's fine when it's obviously not. His older brother Derek is a mechanic who mostly keeps to himself, but shows up for family events. Carlos runs a crew for a large commercial contractor, which means good money when they're busy. But he's smart enough to save for the slow seasons that inevitably come. The real problem started when I brought Sophie to a family barbecue last summer. My mom took one look at Sophie's casual sundress and got that pinched government employee expression she reserves for people she considers beneath her social status. While Sophie tried making polite conversation about Mom's garden and offering to help with dishes, Mom gave her the cold shoulder treatment like Sophie was trying to cut in line at the tax office. Throughout that entire afternoon, Mom made little passive-aggressive comments designed to make Sophie feel unwelcome. When Sophie mentioned she was thinking about getting her master's degree, Mom said teachers should focus on teaching instead of collecting degrees they don't need. When Sophie offered to bring dessert to the next family gathering, Mom said the family had their traditions and didn't need outside input. It was classic passive-aggressive behavior designed to make Sophie feel unwelcome without being openly hostile enough for anyone to call her out. Tyler was the only one who seemed to notice Mom's behavior and made a point of including Sophie in conversations. He even asked her opinion about some educational software his company was considering for employee training. Ashley barely acknowledged Sophie existed, too busy scrolling through her phone and complaining about work drama to engage with anyone properly. When my mom announced she was finally retiring after 39 years of what she called dedicated public service, I wanted to do something truly special for her. Despite her awful attitude toward Sophie, she was still my mother. And 39 years of dealing with angry people at the county tax office deserved some kind of recognition. I thought maybe a grand gesture would help bridge the gap between her and Sophie and show that I still valued family despite the tension. Sophie and I spent weeks planning what we thought would be the perfect surprise retirement celebration. We decided on an upscale waterfront restaurant for a retirement dinner, followed by a week-long Caribbean cruise that would give her the vacation of a lifetime. I wanted everything to be absolutely perfect, so I spared no expense in making this happen. The dinner reservation alone cost $9,500 for their private dining room with stunning waterfront views. This wasn't just any restaurant. We're talking about the whole package with premium wine selection and a 6-course menu prepared by their award-winning chef. The kind of place where dinner for two normally runs $250 before drinks, and they actually have a waiting list for regular reservations. The cruise was another $42,000 for premium everything. I'm talking about balcony suites on a luxury cruise ship, specialty dining packages, spa credits, and shore excursions in 5 different ports, including Cozumel, Jamaica, Grand Cayman, and Costa Maya. I even added the travel insurance because I'm not stupid when it comes to protecting that kind of investment. I spent hours researching that cruise, reading reviews on every cruise forum I could find. I compared cabin locations, studied the ship's layout, and read detailed reviews from previous passengers. I wanted to make absolutely sure my mom got what would be the perfect retirement celebration. Looking back, the irony of how much effort I put into planning something for someone who couldn't even be civil to my fiancé for 3 hours is almost painful. The night of the dinner, Sophie and I arrived about 20 minutes late because she had stayed after school, helping a student whose parents were going through a particularly messy divorce. The kid was acting out in class, and Sophie being Sophie, she couldn't just leave without making sure he was okay and had someone to talk to. She looked absolutely incredible in this navy blue dress she had bought specifically for the occasion, and I was proud to have her by my side. The restaurant's private dining room was everything I had paid for and more. It featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the marina, where you could see million-dollar yachts anchored offshore in the distance. The sunset was painting the water in shades of golden orange, and there was soft jazz playing from speakers you couldn't even see. The ambiance was perfect. Real linen tablecloths, actual silverware, cloth napkins, and the kind of sophisticated atmosphere that screams expensive. The restaurant sommelier had personally selected wine pairings for each course, and the executive chef had created a custom menu featuring locally sourced ingredients. This wasn't some chain restaurant experience. They had a prestigious culinary award-nominated chef and the kind of reputation that comes with excellence. I had specifically chosen this place because I wanted my mom's retirement celebration to be memorable for all the right reasons. 16 people were already seated around the massive mahogany table when we walked in, and the conversation died instantly like someone had hit a mute button. Besides Mom, Dad, Ashley, Carlos, and Derek, there were Uncle Pete and Aunt Linda, my cousins Rebecca and Kevin, plus a few other relatives I only see at weddings and funerals. The kind of extended family gathering that should have been filled with warmth and celebration. Tyler immediately stood up when we walked in and shook my hand. "Jake, this place is incredible. Thanks for putting this together for Linda's retirement." Sophie immediately apologized for being late, explaining about the student situation and thanked Mom for including her in such a special celebration. Mom barely acknowledged her, instead adjusting her reading glasses to study the wine list like she was deciphering ancient hieroglyphics. Dad was already working on what looked like his third Manhattan, judging by the amber ring stains on the white tablecloth near his place setting. Ashley was glued to her iPhone, frantically typing responses to some work emergency, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the screen. She barely looked up when we sat down, even though Tyler tried getting her attention to greet us properly like normal human beings. The server brought out the first course, and the family was already digging in, making appreciative noises about the food quality. The atmosphere should have been celebratory. After all, this was supposed to be a retirement party. Carlos was telling Uncle Pete about a job site where they'd found a 1970s time capsule buried in the foundation, complete with old newspapers and photos. Derek was explaining to anyone who would listen why certain car engines are better than others, going into technical detail that only he seemed to find fascinating. Tyler was asking Dad about his water department stories, actually listening and engaging like a normal person who understands how to make conversation at family gatherings. Sophie reached for one of the stuffed mushrooms from the appetizer platter, literally the closest appetizer to her seat. It was a completely natural movement, the kind of thing you do automatically when food is placed in front of you at a dinner you've been invited to attend. That's when my mom decided to demonstrate exactly how entitled and nasty she could be when she wanted to make a point. "Don't touch those. Those are for family only." The words cut through the dinner conversation like a chainsaw through plywood. Every single person at that table stopped talking instantly, forks suspended halfway to mouths, conversations dying mid-sentence. Even the server who was refilling water glasses at the far end of the table stopped moving and stared in our direction. The silence was so complete, you could hear the soft jazz music that had been background noise suddenly become the only sound in the room. Sophie's hand stopped inches from the platter, her face going bright red. Not angry red, but the deep, mortifying red of someone who just got publicly humiliated in front of 16 people. It was the kind of embarrassment that makes your stomach drop and your chest tighten. Tyler looked absolutely horrified, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Aunt Linda, what are you talking about? Sophie's practically family already," Tyler said, his voice carrying a tone of genuine confusion and growing anger. Mom stared directly at Sophie with pure contempt, while deliberately reaching across the table to grab the exact mushroom Sophie had been going for. She bit into it while maintaining eye contact with Sophie, chewing slowly and methodically like she was marking her territory or asserting dominance over a perceived threat. The deliberate cruelty of the gesture was breathtaking in its pettiness. Fiancé isn't wife. Wife isn't blood. There's always been a hierarchy in this family, and some people need to learn their place, Mom said, her voice carrying the same authoritative tone she probably used when denying tax appeals at the county office. Carlos, who had been quietly nursing a beer and watching this unfold with growing disgust, grabbed 4 mushrooms and placed them directly on Sophie's plate with enough force to make the silverware rattle against the china. "There you go, Sophie. Family privilege officially activated," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm and barely contained anger. Ashley finally looked up from her phone, saw what was happening, and instead of defending Sophie or calling out Mom's completely inappropriate behavior, she actually smirked. She genuinely found watching someone get humiliated entertaining, like she was enjoying the show. The woman had just witnessed her aunt publicly degrade another human being at what was supposed to be a celebration, and she found it amusing. I looked around that table, waiting for someone, anyone, to call out Mom's behavior. Dad was suddenly fascinated by his Caesar salad, studying the croutons like they contained the secrets of the universe. Uncle Pete was reading the wine list like it contained state secrets that required his immediate attention. The silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of silverware against plates and the jazz music that now seemed mockingly cheerful. Sophie whispered that she wasn't really hungry anymore, her voice barely audible and shaking with embarrassment. Something inside me snapped completely. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the hardwood floor with a harsh screech that made everyone look up. "Sophie, we're leaving. Now." Mom didn't even look up from her plate, continuing to cut into the complimentary bread with surgical precision, like nothing had happened. "Sit down, Jake. Don't embarrass yourself over something so trivial." "I embarrass myself? You just humiliated my fiancé at a dinner I'm paying $9,500 for, and you're worried about me embarrassing myself?" That got her attention. She looked up with this expression like I had just spoken in a foreign language, genuinely confused that I would dare challenge her authority in front of the extended family. "You invited us to celebrate my retirement. This is my celebration dinner," Mom said, her voice carrying that same entitled tone she'd probably perfected during decades of dealing with taxpayers who dared to question her decisions. "This was your celebration dinner, past tense. Enjoy paying the check." Carlos stood up too, dropping his napkin on his plate with obvious disgust. "You know what? I'm done too. This is seriously messed up behavior, even for this family." His voice carried the weight of someone who had finally reached his breaking point with years of accumulated family drama. Tyler pushed back from the table and grabbed Ashley's arm, his patience clearly exhausted. "We're leaving too. This is completely inappropriate behavior, And I'm not staying to watch it continue. Ashley jerked her arm away from Tyler's grip, her face flushed with anger. Tyler, sit down! Jake's being dramatic over nothing. No, Ashley. Your aunt just humiliated Sophie for absolutely no reason other than pure cruelty. I'm not staying for this, Tyler replied, his voice firm and disgusted. As we walked toward the exit, I could hear Ashley hissing at Tyler to sit back down and stop making a scene. The woman who raised me had just nuked a family relationship in front of 16 witnesses, and she was going to finish her 6-course meal like it was just another Wednesday night at home. We stood in the restaurant parking lot, the 4 of us, me, Sophie, Carlos, and Tyler. Ashley had stayed inside, probably trying to smooth things over so she could enjoy her expensive meal without the awkwardness of confronting bad behavior. Tyler looked absolutely mortified by the whole situation, shaking his head in disbelief. Jake, I'm so sorry about what just happened in there. That was completely out of line and unacceptable, Tyler said, his voice sincere and apologetic, even though he had nothing to apologize for. Carlos was chain-smoking and shaking his head with disgust. Your mom's completely lost it. I've seen petty family drama before, but that was next-level cruel. She just humiliated Sophie at a dinner you're dropping $9,000 on, and for what? To prove some twisted point about hierarchy? Tyler pulled out his phone with determination. I'm calling a rideshare. Ashley can find her own way home if she wants to stay and finish dinner with people who think treating others like garbage is acceptable behavior. That's when I remembered the cruise. The $42,000 surprise sitting in my email inbox like a ticking time bomb. 8 days on a luxury cruise ship with premium balcony suites that had private verandas overlooking the ocean. Unlimited specialty dining packages, spa credits, and shore excursions in Cozumel, Jamaica, Grand Cayman, and Costa Maya. All of it planned and paid for as a surprise retirement gift for someone who had just shown her true character. I pulled out my phone and called the restaurant first. The manager was surprisingly understanding when I explained there was a family emergency, and I needed to leave immediately. Sir, has your party consumed any food or beverages this evening? The manager asked in a professional tone. They're probably still working on the appetizer course. I'm sure they'll finish the whole meal, I replied, thinking about how Mom would absolutely stay to get every penny's worth of the dinner I was paying for. In that case, we can process a partial refund for the unused portions of the evening, but there will be charges for what's been consumed and the room reservation fee. Fine, just make sure I'm not paying for the full evening when half the party left after 25 minutes. The cruise cancellation took 37 minutes on hold, with elevator music that seemed designed to drive people insane. When I finally reached a representative at the cruise line, she walked me through their cancellation policy with practiced efficiency. Since I was canceling more than 50 days prior to departure, the fee was only $650 total. The remaining $41,350 would be refunded within 12 to 16 business days. Cancel everything. The whole booking, I told her, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and disappointment. Sophie stared at me with wide eyes, finally understanding the full scope of what was happening. Jake, what are you doing? Taking back control? They want to act like you're not family? Fine. Family events are officially canceled. Tyler's rideshare arrived, and he shook my hand firmly before getting in. Jake, you did the right thing. Nobody should have to put up with that kind of treatment, especially at an event they're paying for. Carlos and I followed Sophie back to my house, where she went to shower and decompress from what had just happened. The poor woman had been publicly humiliated in front of my entire extended family, and I could see she was still shaking from the experience. Carlos and I sat in my living room, ordering pizza and discussing what had just unfolded at what was supposed to be a celebration dinner. The cruise was $42,000, I told him, still processing the magnitude of what I'd just canceled. Carlos whistled low, shaking his head in disbelief. Linda just cost herself the vacation of a lifetime because she couldn't control her entitled attitude for 3 hours. That's some expensive petty behavior right there. But the canceled cruise wasn't the end of the financial consequences I was planning. The next morning, I did something I should have done months ago. I canceled the automatic rent payment to my parents. That $1,600 a month that I'd been covering for 3 years without them even having the decency to ask directly was about to become their problem to solve. If they wanted to treat Sophie like garbage and act like she wasn't worthy of basic human respect, they could figure out their own financial problems. My phone started buzzing within hours. The restaurant bill, the canceled cruise, and now the missing rent payment had created a perfect storm of financial panic that was about to consume my family. By the time I turned my phone back on the next morning, I had 94 missed calls and 218 text messages. The notification count looked like something from a natural disaster movie, with red badges covering every communication app on my screen. The messages started confused and panicked about the restaurant bill, which they apparently hadn't expected to get stuck with. But they quickly escalated when they realized I'd canceled their rent payment that they'd been depending on for years. "Jake, the rent money didn't transfer this month. Is there a problem with your bank?" was the first message, still assuming it was some kind of technical error. Then came the desperate pleading as reality started to set in. "We need the rent money by the 7th or we'll get hit with late fees. Can you send it manually?" Then the financial panic really set in when they started doing the math. "The restaurant wants $8,100, and now we don't have rent money. This is a disaster. We're going to lose our apartment." But when they figured out about the cruise, the tone shifted completely to pure entitlement and outrage. "Did you actually cancel my cruise? That was my retirement gift. You can't just take back what you promised." The most telling messages came from Ashley, showing exactly where her priorities lay. "You're being a jerk. Mom made one comment and you're punishing the whole family. Now they can't afford rent because you're having a tantrum." I called Ashley back around noon, curious to see how she would try to spin this situation. "Jake, thank God. You need to send Mom and Dad the rent money today. They're panicking about making their payment." "Why don't you send it?" I asked, already knowing what her answer would be. "What? I can't afford $1,600 a month. You know I have my own bills." The entitlement in her voice was staggering. She expected me to continue bankrolling our parents while she contributed nothing. Then I guess they'll have to figure it out themselves. "You're being completely heartless. They raised you, supported you. This is how you repay them? By cutting them off financially over some stupid dinner drama?" Ashley, Mom publicly humiliated Sophie in front of the entire family. "If you think that's acceptable behavior, you can cover their expenses yourself. I told you I can't afford it. You make more money than anyone in the family. It's your responsibility." "It's not my responsibility. I'm not their father or their employer. I was helping out of kindness, and they showed they don't deserve that kindness." Ashley was quiet for a moment, probably trying to think of another angle to work. Then she came back with pure venom in her voice. "You're an ungrateful little shit. After everything they've done for you, you abandon them over your precious girlfriend's hurt feelings." "She's my fiancé, and I'm done with this conversation." I hung up and blocked her number immediately. That afternoon, my phone rang from Tyler's number, and I was curious to hear his perspective on everything that had unfolded. "Jake, it's Tyler. Look, I wanted to apologize for Ashley's behavior last night and this morning. She's been going absolutely crazy trying to figure out how to help your parents with rent." His voice sounded tired and frustrated, like he'd been dealing with this drama for hours. "She's been pressuring me all morning to cover their $1,600 rent payment. She says it's a family emergency, and we need to step up since you're being unreasonable." "What did you tell her?" "I told her it's not my responsibility to pay rent for her parents. I never agreed to financially support her extended family, and I'm not starting now," Tyler replied with conviction. "Good for you, Tyler. That takes guts to stand up to that kind of pressure. She's been screaming at me for 3 hours about family loyalty and stepping up when people need help. But Jake, I work hard for my money. I'm not paying rent for people who can work and support themselves just because they've gotten comfortable living off your generosity." Over the next few days, the family pressure campaign intensified beyond anything I had expected. It was like they had all coordinated their efforts to guilt trip me back into compliance. Uncle Pete called to lecture me about family obligations and how blood is thicker than water, as if genetics somehow obligated me to fund other people's lifestyles indefinitely. Aunt Linda tried the guilt trip approach, going on and on about Mom's years of dedicated public service and how she deserved to be taken care of in her retirement. Even some cousins I barely talked to throughout the year were weighing in about my supposedly heartless behavior. They were calling and texting about how families should stick together during difficult times, conveniently ignoring the fact that the difficult times were entirely self-created by Mom's cruel behavior. It was fascinating to watch people who had never contributed a dime to my parents' expenses suddenly become experts on family financial responsibility. But the most satisfying part of this whole situation was watching Ashley's marriage start to crack under the pressure she was applying. Tyler told me later that she'd been having screaming matches with him every single night about the rent money, calling him selfish and unsupportive for refusing to write a check to solve what she saw as a family crisis. She couldn't understand why her husband wouldn't just solve the problem with money that wasn't even hers. The entitlement was staggering. She expected Tyler to use his hard-earned income to bail out her parents while she contributed absolutely nothing to the solution except demands and emotional manipulation. For 4 weeks, things were relatively quiet on the family front. Mom and Dad had apparently figured out their rent situation, probably by downsizing or finding cheaper housing somewhere that fit their actual budget. Ashley had stopped calling me after I blocked her number, and I thought maybe they were finally getting the message that their behavior had consequences. Sophie and I decided to plan our own vacation with some of the money I'd gotten back from the cruise cancellation. Nothing as elaborate as the original cruise that Mom had lost through her own behavior, but a nice week in the Outer Banks that we could actually afford and enjoy without family drama. We deserved some time away after all the stress and manipulation we'd been dealing with. The morning we left for the airport, I took a selfie of us at the gate with our boarding passes visible. Both of us were grinning, excited for our first real vacation together as a couple. I posted it to social media with the caption, "Off to paradise with my favorite person." Sometimes the best trips are the ones you plan yourself. We boarded our flight, turned off our phones, and didn't think about my toxic family for the entire week. It was exactly what we needed. Time to decompress, enjoy each other's company, and remember what it felt like to be around people who actually cared about our happiness. When we landed back home and I turned my phone on, I had 162 notifications waiting for me. The family nuclear war had exploded across social media while we were gone, and it was about to get much worse than I had anticipated. Mom had somehow gotten access to my social media post about our vacation and shared it in some family group chat, spinning a completely false narrative about the entire situation. She was telling everyone that I had literally stolen her retirement cruise and was now flaunting it on social media to rub salt in the wound. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. Half the family thought I'd actually taken her vacation and was rubbing it in her face by posting photos from what they believed was originally her cruise. They were calling us selfish, ungrateful, and cruel for supposedly stealing an elderly woman's retirement celebration and then bragging about it online. The comments and messages were absolutely vicious. Someone had even tracked down Sophie's photo sharing account and was leaving nasty comments calling her a homewrecker and much worse. Her school email was getting hate mail from fake accounts created specifically to harass her. Mom was telling everyone that I'd stolen her retirement cruise and abandoned my parents financially, conveniently leaving out the part where I'd paid for everything, canceled it after she disrespected Sophie, or that this was our own vacation we'd planned with our own money. Carlos called while I was scrolling through the chaos, trying to make sense of how things had escalated so quickly. The family's completely losing it. Linda posted that you stole her retirement cruise and cut off your parents financially to spite them. Now half the family thinks you're some kind of monster. Should I post the truth? I asked, wondering if it was worth trying to set the record straight. I already did. Posted screenshots of the restaurant receipts with your name on them, told everyone exactly what happened at dinner and why you canceled everything. About half the family is backing off now that they know the real story. The other half is still Team Linda. They think Sophie's a homewrecker and you're completely whipped. Despite the social media war that was raging, Sophie and I had genuinely enjoyed our time in the Outer Banks. Amazing beaches, incredible seafood, and most importantly, being away from people who think financial manipulation is acceptable, family behavior was exactly what we needed. We got back from the Outer Banks on Sunday afternoon, both of us exhausted from the trip and the ongoing family social media war. Sophie decided to stay home Monday with a stress headache while I headed out to my first job of the week. It was a major emergency call, a burst heating unit in someone's basement that was flooding their finished recreation room. The kind of job that pays well but leaves you covered in coolant and grime for hours. I had to replace about 25 feet of copper piping and install a completely new heat exchanger. Around 2:45 p.m., I was shoulder deep in ductwork when my phone rang. Sophie's name appeared on the screen with her contact photo, and I answered without thinking much about it. "Hey babe, what's up?" Her voice was shaking, barely above a whisper, and filled with pure terror that made my blood run cold immediately. "Jake, you need to come home right now. Please." The tone made every instinct I had screamed that something was seriously wrong. She was absolutely terrified, and I could hear it in every word she spoke. "What's wrong? What happened?" "Your mom. She came over. Sophie's voice broke completely. "Jake, please just get home." The line went dead, and I dropped my tools immediately, running to my truck without even explaining to the homeowner what was happening. I left their basement half flooded with my equipment scattered everywhere, but none of that mattered. Something had happened to Sophie, and I needed to get home immediately. I found Sophie in the kitchen with a bag of frozen peas pressed against her left arm. Her hair was messed up, pulled completely out of the ponytail she'd had it in that morning. Her favorite blue t-shirt was torn at the shoulder seam, and there were dark red finger marks clearly visible on her neck. When I saw the state she was in, I felt a rage building inside me that I'd never experienced before. Jesus Christ, what happened? There was a dark purple bruise running from her wrist to her elbow, the kind you get when someone grabs and twists hard enough to damage tissue underneath the skin. Sophie was trying to stay calm, but I could see her hands shaking as she held the frozen peas against her arm. Your mom showed up about an hour and a half ago, pounding on the door and screaming about the vacation and money, Sophie began, her voice still shaking as she tried to recount what had happened. When I opened the door, she completely lost it. Started screaming about how I ruined her life, stole her retirement, and turned you against your family. I could see the terror still in her eyes as she continued. She put her hands on you? She pushed her way into the house and grabbed my arm, shaking me and calling me a manipulative bitch who didn't deserve you. When I told her to leave and tried to get her to stop, she wouldn't listen. She tried to punch me in the face, but I ducked and she hit the doorframe instead. That's when she grabbed my throat and said she was going to teach me what happens to women who break up families. The image of my mother putting her hands around Sophie's throat filled me with a rage I didn't know I was capable of feeling. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was criminal assault against an innocent person who had done nothing wrong. How did you get her to leave? I asked, trying to stay calm while my mind raced with what I needed to do next. Mrs. Rodriguez next door heard the screaming and threatened to call the police. That's the only reason she let go and stormed out of here. I called 911 immediately, and 2 patrol cars arrived within 18 minutes. Officer Martinez and Officer Johnson were thorough and professional, spending over an hour documenting everything that had happened. They took photographs of Sophie's injuries from multiple angles, recorded detailed witness statements from both Sophie and Mrs. Rodriguez, who had heard the entire confrontation from next door. The evidence was overwhelming and disturbing. The finger marks around Sophie's neck, the bruising on her arm, the torn clothing, and Mrs. Rodriguez's testimony about hearing the threats and violence through the walls. Based on the physical evidence and witness statements we've collected, we have clear grounds for felony assault charges, Officer Martinez explained to us. Due to the strangulation component, you can also file for a restraining order that will keep her away from both of you permanently. I want both, I said without hesitation. I want her arrested, and I want her to stay away from us permanently. After the police left with all their documentation and evidence, I called my mom directly. She answered immediately, probably expecting me to apologize or try to smooth things over like I always had in the past. Jake, thank God you put your hands on Sophie. You came to my house and physically assaulted my fiancé, I interrupted, my voice cold and controlled. She's lying. I never touched her, Mom replied, but her voice lacked any real conviction. I saw the bruises. The police have photographs. You called the police on your own mother? You're not my mother anymore. Mothers don't commit felonies against innocent people. I hung up and blocked her number immediately. Carlos arrived 35 minutes later with takeout and beer, having heard about what happened through the family grapevine that seemed to spread news faster than social media. He took one look at Sophie's bruises, and his face went dark with anger. Linda's completely lost her mind. This is straight-up criminal behavior that goes way beyond family drama. The police said she'll probably be arrested tomorrow, I told him. Good. What she did is absolutely unforgivable, and there need to be consequences. Mom was arrested Tuesday morning and charged with felony assault. The process was swift once the police had all their evidence organized. The restraining order was approved Wednesday, legally prohibiting her from coming within 500 feet of either Sophie or me. By Thursday, the entire extended family knew exactly what had happened, and the reactions split along predictable lines. Ashley tried rallying support for Mom, spinning stories about how Sophie had probably provoked the confrontation or exaggerated what happened. But Carlos posted photos of Sophie's bruises in the family group chat, along with a detailed account of what the police had documented. The visual evidence was impossible to deny or explain away. Uncle Pete said family business should stay private and shouldn't involve law enforcement. So Carlos asked him directly if he'd feel the same way if someone had assaulted his daughter with enough force to leave bruises and finger marks around her throat. Pete didn't have an answer for that. The biggest shock came Friday evening when Dad showed up at my house unannounced. He looked like he'd aged 20 years in 1 week. Bloodshot eyes, messy hair, wrinkled clothes that looked like he'd been sleeping in them. There was a defeated quality about him that I'd never seen before. "Jake, I'm so sorry. Listen," he began, then dropped a bomb I never saw coming. "Your mother crossed the line in a way I can't forgive or ignore. I filed for divorce yesterday." Neither Sophie nor I had expected that. We knew Dad was weak when it came to standing up to Mom, but this was the first time in 34 years that he'd taken a stand against her behavior. When the police called and told me what she'd done, "I've been married to that woman for 34 years and I've never been more ashamed," Dad continued, his voice breaking with emotion. He looked at Sophie with tears in his eyes, the weight of decades of enabling finally hitting him full force. "I failed you both. I should have stood up to her years ago, but I took the easy way out every single time." "Why didn't you?" Sophie asked gently, her voice still hoarse from the assault, but filled with genuine curiosity rather than anger. "Because it was easier to stay quiet than deal with her tantrums and manipulation. I convinced myself that keeping the peace was more important than doing what was right. When I saw those police photos of what she did to you, I realized I'd been married to an abuser for most of my adult life. I've been enabling her behavior for so long that I became part of the problem." Dad's admission was both heartbreaking and validating. For years, I'd watched him make excuses for Mom's behavior, and now he was finally acknowledging the truth that had been obvious to everyone else. But the real satisfaction came from watching the financial and social consequences completely destroy both Mom and Ashley's lives over the following months. Mom's arrest made the local newspaper with her mugshot prominently displayed under a headline that read, "Former County Tax Office employee charged with felony assault." Everyone she'd worked with for 39 years saw it, along with anyone else who bothered to read the local crime section. The State Pension Board launched an investigation into her criminal conviction, ultimately deciding to revoke her retirement benefits entirely. This meant she lost both her pension and her health insurance coverage at the worst possible time. The criminal conviction came with a $6,200 fine, 250 hours of community service cleaning parks and highways in an orange vest, and mandatory anger management classes twice weekly for 8 months. But the civil lawsuit was where I really got my revenge and ensured she faced real consequences for her actions. I hired an attorney, a personal injury specialist who took our case on contingency because the evidence was so overwhelming. The civil suit included charges of assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, medical expenses, and loss of earnings from Sophie missing work due to the trauma. Mom had to hire her own attorney at $450 per hour just to defend herself against the lawsuit, watching her savings drain away with each legal consultation and court appearance. The civil trial was absolutely brutal for her side. We had photographs of Sophie's injuries, witness testimony from Mrs. Rodriguez, police reports documenting everything, and medical documentation of Sophie's physical and emotional trauma. Mom's attorney tried arguing that it was just a family dispute that got out of hand, but the evidence was overwhelming and impossible to dismiss. The jury saw the photographs of the finger marks around Sophie's neck and the extensive bruising on her arm. They heard Mrs. Rodriguez testify about the screaming and threats she'd witnessed. The jury awarded us $52,000 in damages plus $21,000 in legal fees that Mom was responsible for paying. Mom had to sell her beloved luxury SUV that she'd always been so proud of to pay part of the judgment. She liquidated her 401k and took the early withdrawal penalties, watching decades of retirement savings disappear to pay for her moment of violent rage. Dad's divorce attorney was relentless in the property settlement, securing alimony for Dad, half the house equity, and half of her remaining pension benefits while allowing him to keep his own retirement accounts intact. The divorce left Mom financially devastated and socially isolated. 6 months later, she was living in a shabby one-bedroom apartment in a bad part of town, working part-time at a big box retailer's stocking shelves because no government agency would hire her with a felony assault conviction on her record. She lost all her county tax office friends who had seen the mugshot and wanted nothing to do with someone who'd committed such a violent crime. Most of the extended family sided with Dad and me once they understood the full scope of what had happened. Ashley remained her only consistent supporter, but that loyalty was about to cost Ashley everything she'd built in her own life. Ashley's downfall was even more satisfying to watch, and it took longer to develop into the complete disaster it eventually became. The constant fighting with Tyler about money and family loyalty had been slowly destroying their marriage for months. She kept pressuring him to help financially support our parents, calling him selfish and unsupportive every time he refused to write checks for problems that weren't his responsibility. Tyler told me later that Ashley would come home from work every single day ranting about the family situation, demanding that he write checks to solve problems that she couldn't or wouldn't address herself. She'd scream at him for being heartless, compare him unfavorably to other husbands who she claimed stepped up for family during difficult times, and threatened to leave him if he didn't start contributing financially to her parents' situation. The breaking point came when Ashley started working late frequently, claiming she had important projects that required overtime and staying at the office well past normal business hours. She'd come home around 9 or 10 at night, exhausted and stressed, talking about how demanding her marketing projects had become and how her supervisor was piling extra responsibilities on her team. Tyler got suspicious when her stories didn't add up, and the details kept changing. The projects she described didn't match the timeline she'd given him, and some of the work emergencies she mentioned seemed manufactured or exaggerated. He called me 10 months after the restaurant incident with news I wasn't expecting, and his voice was filled with both anger and resignation. "Jake, I wanted you to hear this from me first before it becomes family gossip. I'm divorcing Ashley." "What happened?" I asked, though I suspected it had something to do with all the pressure she'd been putting on him about financial support for our parents. "I caught her cheating. She's been having an affair with some guy from her marketing department for 5 months, Tyler said, his voice heavy with disappointment and betrayal. When I confronted her with the evidence I'd gathered, she actually said it was my fault for not being supportive enough during her family crisis. The audacity of that response was staggering. Ashley had been cheating on her husband while simultaneously demanding that he bankroll her parents' lifestyle, and when caught, she blamed him for her infidelity. Tyler told me he'd hired a private investigator after becoming suspicious of her behavior, and the evidence was undeniable. Photographs, hotel receipts, text messages that left no doubt about what had been happening. Tyler told me he'd already filed for divorce, and then he dropped another piece of information that made Ashley's situation even worse. The best part? We had a prenup. It's ironclad, and my attorney says it's one of the most thorough he's ever seen. Tyler had insisted on the prenuptial agreement before their marriage, and Ashley had signed it thinking she'd never need to worry about it. She'd probably assumed their marriage would last forever, and that the prenup was just a formality. But now, it meant she was walking away from the marriage with nothing but her personal belongings and the massive credit card debt she'd accumulated trying to maintain a lifestyle she couldn't afford. Ashley tried desperately to save her marriage once she realized the full scope of what she was losing. She promised to end the affair immediately and begged Tyler to go to counseling with her. She offered to change her behavior, stop pressuring him about family financial issues, and basically do whatever it took to avoid the divorce. But Tyler was completely done with her manipulation and lies. He'd spent months being called selfish and unsupportive while she was cheating on him with a coworker. The irony was perfect. She'd been calling him heartless for not wanting to support her parents financially, while she was betraying their marriage vows with another man. Tyler had reached his breaking point and wasn't interested in second chances or marriage counseling. With nowhere else to go and no money for her own place, Ashley ended up moving in with Mom. But since Mom was now living in Aunt Patricia's house, Mom's younger sister who had reluctantly taken her in after the divorce, this meant 2 bitter broke women were now crammed into Patricia's small 2-bedroom place. Both of them were blaming everyone else for their problems while contributing nothing positive to their own situations. Aunt Patricia told Carlos later that living with both Mom and Ashley was like hosting a daily pity party where everything was everyone else's fault. They'd sit around complaining about how ungrateful I was, how Sophie had ruined the family, and how Tyler was a terrible husband for not supporting family during difficult times. Patricia was already regretting her decision to help them and was looking for ways to encourage them to find alternative living arrangements. Meanwhile, my life kept getting better in every possible way. Sophie and I got married in a beautiful ceremony that was everything we dreamed of. Dad walked Sophie down the aisle at our wedding, which meant the world to both of us. The wedding was small and intimate. A ceremony at a vineyard outside town followed by a reception for close friends and family members who actually supported our relationship. Carlos was my best man, and his speech had everyone alternating between tears of laughter and genuine emotion. It was hilarious and touching at the same time, perfectly capturing our friendship and the journey that had brought us to that point. Sophie looked absolutely radiant, and seeing her happy after everything she'd been through made all the family drama worth enduring. Sophie's pregnant now, and Dad is beyond excited about becoming a grandfather. He's been in counseling for over a year, working through decades of enabling mom's abusive behavior and learning how to establish healthy boundaries. The therapy has been transformative for him. He's actually happier than I've seen him in years, free from the constant stress of managing mom's moods and demands. My business continues to thrive beyond my wildest expectations. We bought the building we'd been renting last year and hired 4 more employees to handle our growing client base. I'm seriously considering opening a second location across town to better serve our customers. Nick's handling most of the day-to-day operations now, which allows me to focus on growing the company and planning for the future. The restraining order means mom can't attend any family events, which has effectively made her a stranger to her own extended family. She couldn't be at our wedding ceremony, watching her son marry the woman she'd tried to destroy. She won't be able to visit when her grandchild is born, missing out on one of the most important milestones in our family's future. She won't be welcome at holiday gatherings, birthday parties, or any other family celebrations for the foreseeable future. She made herself a stranger to her own family because she couldn't treat Sophie with basic human decency for 3 hours at a dinner I was paying for. The irony is staggering. She threw away decades of family relationships and her entire financial security over a petty power play involving appetizers at a restaurant. The woman who spent 39 years in government service, supposedly helping people, couldn't extend basic courtesy to the woman her son loves. Ashley lost her husband, her comfortable home, her middle-class lifestyle, and her dignity in the span of a few months. All because she thought she could manipulate and pressure people into bankrolling her parents' bad behavior while simultaneously betraying her marriage vows. She went from living in a nice apartment with a stable marriage to being a divorced woman with massive debt, sleeping on a pull-out couch in her aunt's cramped house. The woman who used to lecture me about family loyalty and stepping up during difficult times is now completely dependent on the charity of relatives who are already regretting their decision to help her. She lost everything because she chose to support toxic behavior instead of encouraging her parents to take responsibility for their own actions and financial situation. Sometimes the best revenge is just stepping back and letting toxic people destroy themselves through their own choices and behavior. I didn't have to plot or scheme or work to ruin their lives. I simply stopped enabling their bad behavior and watched them face the natural consequences of their actions. Mom's violent assault on Sophie wasn't an isolated incident of poor judgment. It was the inevitable escalation of years of entitled, manipulative behavior that had been enabled by everyone around her. When someone finally said no and established boundaries, she couldn't handle it and resorted to criminal violence. The legal system, her employer, and her own family all responded appropriately to her choices. Ashley's affair and subsequent divorce weren't caused by my refusal to fund our parents. They were the result of her own character flaws and inability to honor her marriage vows. She chose to cheat on her husband while demanding he sacrifice his financial security for her extended family. When that house of cards collapsed, she had no one to blame but herself. Meanwhile, Sophie and I are building the life we always wanted, surrounded by people who actually care about our happiness and success. Dad has transformed into the father I always wished he could be, finally free from decades of emotional manipulation and abuse. My business continues to grow, providing financial security and career satisfaction that my family tried to exploit but could never destroy. The restraining order, the criminal conviction, the civil lawsuit, and the social consequences all happened because Mom chose violence over accountability. The divorce, the financial devastation, and the social isolation all followed naturally from decades of toxic behavior that finally caught up with her. Ashley's complete financial and personal ruin came from her own choices to cheat on her husband while pressuring him to fund her parents' lifestyle. The prenup that left her with nothing was something she'd agreed to years before any of this drama started. Her current situation living on charity in her aunt's house is the direct result of her own decisions and character flaws. I learned that blood doesn't make you family. Respect, support, and genuine care make you family. The people who stood by us during the worst of this drama, like Carlos and Tyler, proved themselves to be more family than the people who shared my DNA, but treated us like garbage. Sometimes, walking away from toxic people is the kindest thing you can do for everyone involved, including them. It forces them to face the consequences of their behavior and gives them the opportunity to change, even if they choose not to take it. It also protects you and the people you love from further damage and manipulation. Looking back, I'm grateful this all happened before Sophie and I got married and started having children. We learned exactly who we could count on and who we needed to keep at a distance. Our child will grow up knowing their grandfather, who learned to stand up for what's right, and they'll be protected from the kind of toxic manipulation that defined my childhood. The best part is that none of this required me to become a bad person or compromise my values. I simply stopped funding bad behavior and protected the woman I love from people who wanted to hurt her. Everything else was just the natural consequences of their own choices playing out exactly as they deserved.